In November 1910, 7 men boarded a private train in secrecy, heading to a remote island off Georgia's coast. Each carried a quarter of the world's wealth, and each carried a plan that would change America forever. Over 10 days, hidden from the public eye, these men wrote the blueprint for what would become the Federal Reserve, a system that appears government-run but answers only to private bankers. They used fake names, left history guessing, and disguised legislation as reform. By December 23, 1913, their plan was law, passed while Congress slept. This wasn't a simple act of banking. It was a takeover of the American money supply, a silent coup where ordinary citizens unknowingly became debtors in their own country. From the panic of 1907 to the bailouts of 2008 and 2020. The machinery these men built has shaped every financial crisis, every inflation spike, every collapse of middle-class wealth. Your dollars, your savings, your future quietly controlled by institutions born in secrecy over a century ago. What happened on that island still dictates the economy today. And the story of Jackal Island isn't just history. It's the key to understanding why the system works against you, who profits from every crisis, and how the invisible powers of money continue to shape the world you live in. October 1907. America teetered on the edge of financial collapse. Stock markets plunged. Banks failed. Dictators panicked. From New York to San Francisco, the nation witnessed the raw terror of a system with no safety net. There was no central bank, no lender of last resort, and no government mechanism capable of stopping the unraveling. Chaos ruled. People withdrew their life savings. Factories halted. Jobs vanished overnight. Amid the panic, one man emerged, John Pierpont Morgan, the most powerful banker in America. His network spanned railroads, steel, and finance. To the public, he was a savior. Behind closed doors, he was a strategist. Morgan did what the government could not. He summoned rival bankers to his private library in Manhattan. Doors were locked, phones cut off. For hours, they huddled over ledgers, assessing the collapsing system. Morgan's plan was audacious. He would coordinate massive liquidity injections using the private wealth of a few elite institutions. He forced banks to pool their resources, essentially creating a temporary central bank out of sheer will and concentrated capital. Within weeks, bank runs slowed. Panic receded. Atisa stabilized. But there was a lesson in his triumph, one that Morgan intended to capitalize on. The message was clear. Private bankers could control money better than any government. It was a blueprint, unspoken but undeniable. He didn't save the system out of altruism. He saved it to demonstrate the necessity of a central authority under banker control. The numbers tell the story. By the end of the panic, 25 banks and trust companies had failed. Businesses collapsed. Stock prices fell nearly 50% from peak to trough. And yet, Morgan's empire emerged unscathed. It was power consolidated in crisis. Economists today, including Richard Silla of NYU, point out that the 1907 panic directly led to the creation of the National Monetary Commission, the legal precursor to the Federal Reserve. Observers of the era called it a banker's coup disguised as rescue. Imagine the stakes. The American economy, worth roughly $40 billion in 1907, was on the brink. Jobs, livelihoods, and futures depended on decisions made in secret rooms by a handful of men. Each dollar flowing through the banks was not just money, it was leverage. Influence, a tool to shape the future of finance. The panic ended, but the fear of instability lingered. Citizens had seen what happened without centralized control, and bankers had seen their opportunity. The world was watching, unaware that the foundations for a hidden financial empire were being laid. By the end of 1907, one truth was unavoidable. When chaos strikes, the powerful decide who survives. And the era of private control over national money was quietly dawning, a shadow over the American economy that would grow far larger than anyone imagined. But this was just the beginning. 10 years later, 7 men would take the next step. Jackal Island was only the beginning, but these 7 men crafted in secret wasn't just legislation. It was a masterclass in financial deception. Their goal: create a central bank that looked like it served the people, but in reality served private banks. To the public, it would be a government institution. To the bankers, it would be a money-making machine. The genius lay in the illusion. They called it the Federal Reserve System, a name designed to inspire trust. Federal implied government control. Reserve implied stability. But behind the curtain, ownership and power rested with private banks. The structure was carefully engineered. The United States would have 12 regional Federal Reserve banks spread across the country to appear decentralized. But the clever part? The New York Fed controlled the entire system. Most major banks were members of the New York Fed. Through layered control, decisions from Wall Street dominated every branch in the nation. Ownership was equally concealed. Member banks bought stock in their regional Fed banks. They elected 6 of 9 directors. The remaining 3 were government appointees, but these appointees had little real power. Day-to-day operations, policy direction, and financial strategy, all dictated by private bankers. In other words, the public thought it was decentralized, but the true command center was Wall Street. Paul Warburg, the European banking expert, was the architect. Drawing from the Bank of England, the Reichsbank, and Banque de France, Warburg designed a system that combined government backing with private ownership. Interest rates, money supply, and credit would all be indirectly controlled by the banks themselves. Every decision favored profit for the few, stability for the wealthy, and public ignorance. Consider the numbers. At the time, the U.S. money supply was fragile. Gold-backed dollars limited lending and government spending. The new Federal Reserve would change that forever. With its creation, banks could effectively create money from nothing, loan it to the government, and collect interest, all while the public paid the bill. The psychological sophistication of this blueprint was stunning. Americans distrusted big banks after the Panic of 1907. Any attempt to centralize power would face massive opposition. So the bankers designed a system that looked like a public reform. Words like Federal Reserve and Reserve Bank were deliberate. The mechanism was hidden, the impact invisible to ordinary citizens. By the time the legislation left Jackal Island, it wasn't just a law. It was a blueprint for a private financial empire operating under the guise of public service. The stage was set for a century of economic control, crises, and wealth transfer, all perfectly legal, and nearly impossible for the public to detect. The question remained: how exactly would this system create money, profit the bankers, and bind taxpayers to its interest payments? That story begins with the next phase, the mechanism of money creation itself. November 1910, 7 men, 1 private island. 10 days of secrecy that would change the course of American history. Hoboken, New Jersey, a quiet train station, a seemingly ordinary November morning. But inside a private rail car, a hidden agenda was unfolding. The passengers weren't ordinary men. They represented 1/4 of the world's wealth, yet their faces were unknown to the public. The train rolled south, carrying bankers and financiers to Jackal Island, Georgia, a secluded private club owned by the nation's wealthiest families. No press, no outsiders, no assistants, only these 7 architects of a financial revolution. Each was instructed to travel alone, use only first names. Their mission: write legislation that would create a central bank under their control. Disguised as a government institution, inside the island's grand halls, strategy replaced leisure. They weren't here for hunting or sport. They were here to engineer a system that would dominate money itself. Each man brought a unique skill. Paul Warburg, with his European central banking expertise, drafted the blueprint. Benjamin Strong ensured J.P. Morgan's interests were protected. Nelson Aldrich, political titan and Rockefeller ally, would guide the plan through Congress. The remaining conspirators coordinated influence, capital, and access. Every word, every clause, every paragraph was calculated. The public could never know. Americans still hated banks after the panic of 1907. Any appearance of a banker-led takeover would have sparked outrage, possibly riots. So the language was carefully crafted. Federal Reserve, terms designed to imply stability, neutrality, government oversight while hiding the truth. The scale of the operation is staggering. These 7 men controlled approximately $600 billion in 1910 assets, roughly $20 trillion today. One private meeting, it's 10 days, enough wealth and influence to dictate global finance. Outside the island, the nation slept, unaware of the power being centralized in secret. At night, the halls of Jackal Island echoed with whispered debate and urgent typing. Strategies were tested, failures revised. Every scenario from political pushback to public scrutiny was anticipated. Their goal wasn't just to pass a law, it was to lock in a system that would create money, control credit, and profit endlessly, all while appearing as a public reform. The psychological tension was immense. They knew exposure would ruin everything. A single leak could destroy careers, fortunes, and the plan itself. Yet, behind the curtains of secrecy, they pressed forward. History would never know their names. Their faces would remain hidden, but their creation would define the 20th century. 10 days later, they left Jackal Island. Legislation in hand, a blueprint for the Federal Reserve. A system designed to appear public, function privately, and enrich the few at the expense of the many. The world would continue, oblivious as a hidden financial empire quietly came into being. But the full consequences of this secret gathering, that story was just beginning. The Federal Reserve wasn't just a bank. It was a money-printing machine disguised as a stabilizer. To understand its power, you need to see the invisible gears turning behind your dollars, gears designed to extract wealth from the public and feed private banks. Here's how it worked. The government needed money for wars, infrastructure, social programs. Instead of raising taxes or cutting spending, it borrowed from the Federal Reserve, but the Fed didn't hand over existing cash. No, it created new money out of nothing. Literally, numbers typed into a ledger became dollars. Paper printed in secret became spending power. This wasn't earned. It wasn't taxed. It was invented. Next, the government spent. Contracts, salaries, military hardware, public projects, all fueled by newly created money. On the surface, the economy appeared vibrant. But underneath, a hidden mechanism was at work. That money came with strings, interest owed to the Fed, a private banking cartel. And who pays that interest? You, every taxpayer, contributes through income taxes, sales taxes, and indirect levies. Consider the scale. During World War I, the Fed created $25 billion in new money, doubling the U.S. money supply. Banks received interest on every loan. Governments spent far beyond their revenue. Citizens bore the cost without realizing it. Today, the numbers are even more staggering. In the 2008 financial crisis, the Fed created $4.5 trillion to bail out banks. Not a single major bank failed. Millions of Americans lost homes, jobs, and savings. The math is chilling. The Fed injects money, banks profit, taxpayers pay. The system is cyclical. Low interest rates make borrowing cheap. Banks invest, speculate, and expand wealth. High rates, the public suffers. Mortgages, car loans, credit cards, all tied to Fed decisions. Banks always get the first slice. Wages and prices adjust later, meaning the public absorbs the hidden cost of newly created money losing value over time. Scientist economists like Milton Friedman warned that inflation is taxation without legislation. The Federal Reserve weaponized this principle. By targeting 2% annual inflation, your money loses purchasing power year after year. A $1 bill in 1913 buys only 3 cents today. That's 97% lost. The mechanism is invisible, yet devastating. This is why the Federal Reserve is not just a bank. It's a controlled engine of wealth transfer, a carefully designed system that enriches banks while keeping the public dependent. Every financial crisis, every bailout, every policy tweak feeds the same hidden structure. The 7 men of Jackal Island didn't just write legislation. They engineered a money machine that enslaves the economy. And here asks the question that chills even the experts. If this system was designed over a century ago, what happens when the public finally realizes the true mechanics? The next chapter reveals the historical consequences, wars, depressions, and crises that were all amplified by the Fed's secret power. The Federal Reserve wasn't just a bank. It was a hidden force shaping history. Wars, depressions, global crises, all were amplified, financed, and manipulated through the invisible engine created on Jackal Island. Every time the world seemed to spiral, the Fed was quietly turning numbers into power. Take World War I. 3 months before the Fed officially opened in 1914, Europe plunged into war. America, still neutral, needed resources. The Fed created $25 billion in new money, funding war bonds, loans, and contracts. Armaments, ships, uniforms, all paid with money that had never existed before. Banks collected interest. Taxpayers carried the burden. J.P. Morgan's bank became the sole purchasing agent for Britain and France, earning commissions on billions. It wasn't coincidence. It was the first demonstration of Jackal Island's blueprint in action. Then came the Roaring '20s. Easy money, low interest rates, speculation fueled a stock market bubble. The public, chasing wealth, borrowed heavily. Banks profited massively. Benjamin Strong, head of the New York Fed, deliberately kept rates low, knowing the bubble enriched his friends. The climax. 1929. The stock market crashed. Banks failed. Unemployment soared to 25%. The public suffered. The big banks consolidated wealth. The system had survived. The people hadn't. World War II repeated the pattern. Government debt exploded from $40 billion to $260 billion. The Fed bought government bonds, creating money for war. Armaments and infrastructure flowed. Banks earned interest. Ordinary citizens faced inflation, rationing, and sacrifice. The Fed profited while the public paid. Then came 1971. Nixon severed the dollar from gold. The dollar became pure fiat, backed only by trust and the Fed's printing press. Suddenly, there were no limits. The Federal Reserve could create money at will. Governments spent freely. Banks collected interest. The public absorbed inflation. Crisis since the 2008 mortgage crash. COVID-19 market collapse follows the same pattern. Trillions of dollars are created. Banks are rescued. Ordinary Americans pay the price. Think about it. Since 1913, the dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power. What cost $1 in 1913 costs $32 today. Wealth inequality is at historic highs. The top 1% own more than the bottom 90%. And it's not random. It's the deliberate outcome of a system designed to protect banks, consolidate power, and siphon wealth from the public. Every crisis, every bailout, every policy tweak has a pattern. The Fed profits, banks consolidate, and ordinary citizens lose. Jackal Island wasn't just history. It's a legacy written in our money, our economy, and our lives. And here asks the looming question that haunts economists and historians alike. If the Federal Reserve has shaped the last century, what hidden forces are shaping the next decade? The answer leads straight into our final key point: modern reality, inflation. Bailouts, wealth inequality. Jackal Island's legacy continues, controlling your money, your economy, and your life. The creature from Jackal Island isn't a relic of the past. It's alive, more powerful than ever. Its reach extends into every paycheck, every mortgage, every government policy. Inflation, bailouts, and wealth inequality are not accidents. They are the engine of a system designed to enrich banks while ordinary citizens shoulder the cost. Look at inflation. Since 1913, the dollar has lost nearly 98% of its purchasing power. What cost $1 then costs $32 today. That's not just math, it's daily life disappearing quietly. Gas, food, rent, everything you earn buys less. The Fed sets the rules. It targets 2% inflation annually. Every year, your savings lose value, deliberately. Over a lifetime, your money halves in real terms. And the banks? They profit from every cycle. Consider the 2008 financial crisis. Mortgage lending had run wild. Banks collapsed, but the Fed intervened. It created $4.5 trillion out of thin air to rescue them. Not a single major bank failed. Not a single CEO went to jail. Meanwhile, 10 million Americans lost their homes. Unemployment surged to 10%, and small businesses vanished. The Fed's actions saved the system, not the people. Fast forward to March 2020, when COVID-19 shook global markets. The Fed unleashed $4 trillion in 6 months, buying government and corporate bonds, even junk bonds. Stock markets hit all-time highs. Billionaires gained $1.8 trillion. But millions of workers faced unemployment, small businesses shuttered, and families struggled to survive. The Fed's money didn't trickle down. It flowed upward, enriching the wealthy who controlled the banks. The system's inner mechanics are subtle but brutal. When the Fed creates money, banks get it first. They can invest it with full purchasing power. By the time it reaches wages and prices, it's been diluted. You work harder for money that's worth less every year. Every bailout, every stimulus, every rate adjustment benefits the financial elite. Jackal Island's heirs while ordinary Americans pay the price. And the power isn't going away. The Fed sets interest rates that determine your mortgage, your car loan, your credit card, and even your savings. Low rates. You earn almost nothing on savings. Banks borrow cheap. High rates. Your debt costs more. Banks profit more. The system is rigged to protect the banks and extract wealth from the public with subtle precision that most never notice. The lesson is chilling. The Jackal Island system never sleeps. It controls your money, your economy, and ultimately, your life. The same 7 men who met in secret in 1910 designed it to be resilient, invisible, and self-reinforcing. And now, as you face rising costs, market volatility, and an uncertain economic future, remember this: the creature from Jackal Island still feeds. The question isn't whether it exists, the question is how long until it feeds on you next. The story of Jackal Island isn't history. It's the system controlling your money right now. Every crisis, every bailout, every rise in prices isn't random. It's part of a plan created over a century ago by 7 men in secret. Now you know the truth. You know who really controls your dollars, your savings, and your financial future. But knowing isn't enough. Curiosity is power. Awareness is your first defense. If you want to see beyond the headlines, uncover the hidden forces shaping the economy, and protect your wealth from the system they built, you need to stay informed. Subscribe now, hit the notification bell, and join us as we expose the secrets they don't want you to see. Every video peels back another layer of Jackal Island, the creature that controls your money and your life. Remember, the system is still feeding, and the clock is ticking. Don't let it catch you unprepared.